Thank you, thank you. First, let's clarify something here. Whoever is younger than 65, get out of here, because this is about aging. So if you are under 65, there's nothing interesting for you to hear. Okay? Some stubborn people here still, I guess. Okay, that's me, and you don't really want to hear about me. And this fellow here, my colleague, is not here. So let me explain why there are two names here and then only me here. Anyone remember that the Oakland A's is moving to Las Vegas? They just demolished a casino in Vegas to make room for the new stadium. Now, what movie came out many years ago about the Oakland A's? Anyone remember that? Moneyball. What was Moneyball about? Statistics. They found a young Yale graduate, smart, obviously, did all the analysis and decided to reline up the players. And Oakland A's was not a big money team, big name players, etc., but they won the games. And every baseball team since then decided to follow the thing. And this is the smart guy. I am the Brad Pitt guy who used the, hey, come on. Bob, don't tell me that I don't look handsome as, okay? So unfortunately, he was not able to come, but also there are a lot of other people who participate in this study. I'm just the good-looking guy making the presentation, getting all the glories, okay? All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we did and why we did it, and hopefully make this interesting. And then we are going to show you what we found and how we can use this as a model, that you don't have to depend on another smart kid that analyze the data for you using all your data, etc., because we all know that you have a lot of data, everyone has, but the data is unlikely to be very clean and well organized, etc. So let's try to make things simple. And at the end, I'm going to sell you something. Okay, I am not Mr. Ex-President. I don't have a Bible to sell you. I don't have a watch to sell you, but have some investment ideas for you. Okay? All right. So how we normally think about industrial equipment, production equipment. So that's the famous bathtub curve that came out many years ago, that some equipment may die early in the process, and then later on when they age, they start failing. That's the traditional way of thinking. And human beings have a slightly different behavior. We tend to survive for quite some time. I'm discounting the infant mortality issue here. And then after a certain age, things go downhill. And that red arrow is what the US Census data show that, hey, this is your life expectancy, and that's how they calculate your Social Security, etc., okay? And medical equipment, we don't really know, so we have some hypotheses around. And we show here in green curve the active inventory, the retired equipment, and the disposed equipment. So we look at these curves and try to see whether we can figure out something about what's going on and how we're going to analyze this thing. Okay, so if there is a significant aging aspect to medical equipment, then we have to think about inventory, because we have to replace equipment. We have to plan maintenance accordingly, and we have replacement needs, as I mentioned earlier. So this kind of information is important. Now, it seems that it is part of our social culture, etc., that we believe everything ages. But you will see that it's not exactly true for some types of medical equipment. But the tradition is to believe that is the case, so much so that we have a booklet published by the American Hospital Association since 1973, so older than many of you here, okay? And that is called the depreciation of assets. And this booklet includes not just equipment, but also other building, etc. And this is really important because it is required by the Center for Medicare, Medicaid Services for hospitals that participate in those programs to use this as depreciation table. Not necessary for replacement. However, many consultants, companies, etc., and even VHA, the Veterans Administration, actually use similar tables to suggest replacement of equipment. So we are going to show a lot of red arrows in our graphs later to show where they are suggesting and what our data actually shows, okay? We analyzed about 342,000 pieces of equipment. This is about a little over one half of our inventory. As I said, unfortunately, we also have a lot of messy data, some data we don't really know when the equipment was actually produced or installed in the hospital. Some equipment was apparently purchased, used, etc., etc. So we had to dump those things. And so we use the year that was manufactured as if we know, and then, or at least when it was acquired and installed. Repairs, NPMs, we wanted to see active equipment disposals, and then we calculated an estimated life expectancy based on data, very much like the Census Bureau calculate the life expectancy of human beings, okay? And then we are going to look into the impact of aging on equipment maintenance, because if you have a piece of equipment that starts failing more and more often as it ages, then you may need to think about doing more things. Some people call this PM, but meaning preventive maintenance, but it has been demonstrated that a lot of times they are not exactly preventive in nature. You plan those things, you schedule those things, but they are actually more finding hidden failures that the users could not tell or you cannot tell unless you put a tester on the equipment. So we don't really call that preventive anymore. We call that planned or scheduled maintenance. And also, as I mentioned before, when equipment needs to be disposed and replaced is something that we need to think about, and then the expected life, okay? So let me show you some results before we go into the model so you understand where we are coming from. So we found, and we believe that is the case, that there are three classes of equipment. One, we call CIA. Obviously, some people in Langley, Virginia doesn't like we're doing that, but that's tough luck, okay? Because we believe we can see clear impact of aging for those devices. Then there's another group that has no impact of aging. They just keep chugging along as long as you keep repairing and inspecting those things. And then there's a third group we call inconclusive because it's messy. That in part is because in order to get a number of pieces of equipment that is statistically significant, we had to aggregate different brands and models. So if you pick up a Chevy product combined with a Ford product versus a Toyota product, a Honda product, very likely you are going to get some messy data. So we need to dig deeper into the data, but right now we haven't had a chance to do that. That takes time, and also more data is likely to be necessary. So let me show you what we mean by CIA, clear impact of aging. So this is age on the horizontal axis, and this is the number of work orders. And the one that we are particularly interested is the red one, because those are the correctives, the repairs that we need to perform. And to also be honest here, we are putting some gray boxes in each one of them to show that when the number of records have decreased to the point that it's statistically questionable what we can really be sure about. Also shown are the PMs. The reason we are showing the PM is to show that we did not ignore those pieces of equipment. We did, for example, you take the CT scanner, the PMs were pretty much constant all those years. However, it's very clear the repairs started increasing with age. Okay, and so, and by the way, the black line shows the inventory, so at least we know, where is the high density, or high density is typically in the beginning, because a lot of equipment are younger. There's nothing surprising. And by the way, as I mentioned before, the red arrows here indicate the depreciation, the so-called expected useful life defined by the American Hospital Association. By the way, they claim that those numbers of years are determined by a group of experts. And if you read the booklet, I have not seen any name there that I recognize as people who are very experienced in medical equipment. They are often people in architectural companies, civil engineering companies, people who are well versed with engineering issues, but not necessarily medical equipment issues. Nonetheless, this is what we see for some typical equipment. Okay, and it's not limited to imaging, as you see the hemodialysis equipment here. Okay, this one we claim to be NIAs because we don't see any significant change of the number of repairs over the years. See, that goes quite far. Some of these things may be because we dispose of those things so much that there are so little data points available. You could say, well, this fluctuates a lot. Yeah, but again, nothing clearly indicating there is a degradation of equipment over time. And this is just some examples, obviously. Again, the AHA depreciation years is very clearly indicated here, and we clearly exceed that by a long stretch. Okay, and these are the IRAs, the ones that we claim to be inconclusive because we see fluctuations that we are not so sure. Seem to be sometimes going up, sometimes going down. We don't know exactly why. We need to analyze. Okay, so what is the impact on lifespan? We look into the disposable pattern, and we see two groups. One is the gradual, as equipment ages, deteriorates, etc., you dispose as needed and replace as needed. And then there's a group, it's a lump replacement, and that is often motivated by either a significant technological advance. You have a new product on the market that is significantly better than older ones. It's the so-called obsolescence issue. It's not exactly the equipment is not no longer working or reliably, but it's because you have some new bells and whistles that deemed clinically important. And also sometimes hospitals replace a group of equipment in order to standardize the equipment to reduce the number of use errors. Use errors is not user error. Use error is due to the so-called usability or human factors engineering challenges that when people confronted with different brands and models of equipment with different names and dials and etc., get confused and make mistakes. So they stand.
Those events. So you don't count those events.
No, you'll see. We'll show you. This is first group, the gradual disposal. We showed the disposals, in the bar graphs, and then the inventory, the active inventory as the equipment ages. Again, has no clear rhyme or reason. It simply just goes with time, and then they are replaced, and again, lasting a whole lot longer than the AHA table. And these are the groups. Sometimes groups can be traced to certain events. For example, these two lower ones here are something that clearly indicates what we experienced during the pandemic. We had to buy a lot of ventilators. We had to buy a lot of pulse oximeters because of COVID. Okay, so the inventory increased suddenly, but for a good reason, specific reason, but the disposal is a totally different story. Okay, but there are group disposals, as I mentioned, for standardization of infusion pumps. That's a quite common thing that happens in hospitals. Okay, all right. Okay, so we went ahead and calculated the life expectancy according to our data and compared them against the AHA data, the VHA data, and the ECRI data. Okay, as you can see, our data is clearly significantly longer than those recommended by the those organizations, with some exceptions. This one here is we found to be shorter. Okay, and I think there was another one here. Yeah, this one is slightly shorter than what ECRI recommend. But on average, you can see we found that the equipment lasts something like twice the number of years recommended by those organizations. Again, I'm not saying that those people are making wrong suggestions. Depreciation is the primary purpose for AHA, okay? And for hospitals, if they are for-profit, depreciation is very important for the reporting of taxes. And for non-for-profit hospitals, it is very important too for them to seek donations, endowments, etc., etc. So that is a separate issue. But what I'm trying to say is that don't use depreciation as a criteria or primary criteria for replacement. Okay. The fact that I'm over 65 does not mean that we should take it out there and shot and toss out, right? Although I think several people wanted to do that here. Okay, so we thought it would be nice if we can come up with a simple model that does not have to be based on tons of data, because that took a long time to analyze things. So we finally came up with this model that you may think is very simplistic. 3 variables only: stress, durability, and use. Stress is what we think that what kind of energy, what kind of stress is naturally embedded in the device by the technology that is employed. For example, the CT scanner uses X-ray tubes. X-ray tubes, as you know, use high voltage. It's something that rotates there and produce a lot of heat, and then gantry is very heavy, have to turn around. All those things are mechanical, electrical stress. And then there are equipment that have chemical stress, as for example, the hemodialysis systems, okay? So those things obviously have an impact on the equipment, no matter what you do. Again, going back to the old days, I don't want to call out names here because people will get offended, but some of people, old people like me, remember the days when the TV sets were made with a vacuum tube, a big tube, and inside, even those amplifiers were based on vacuum tubes. And I personally had to replace those vacuum tubes inside every 2 years or so because they wear out. There's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And then came the transistors, and then came the integrated circuits, and now CPUs, etc., etc. Nowadays, it's better for you to toss that TV and buy another one that's better and cheaper than trying to fix the old one. But in the old days, I could not afford to replace the whole TV set. Okay, things have changed, and the stress went down significantly for your computers, projectors. A lot of things are now all solid state. Okay, and we saw that even in the space age things. The computers used in the lunar expeditions were not as reliable as what we have today. Okay, durability. Durability is something that is in the design process, the material, and also in the production, the workmanship that is invested by the manufacturer of that device. Okay, some of you older people also remember in the old days, the refrigerators, washers and dryers in your home can last 25, 30 years easily. Nowadays, you buy one and then 5 years later, you toss it, you get another one because they don't build like used to be, okay? So, and finally, use. There is no question that different departments use the same device in different ways, and not because people, the users want to abuse equipment necessarily. The same defibrillator that is purchased by the hospital is used in the med surg area occasionally when the patient calls, whereas in the emergency department, in the ambulance, they are used very often. Okay, but that's natural. And you do expect that the ones that are used more often get wear out more easily. So that is the reason the use factor has to be here. We tried a few other things and we could not find any good reasons and good data to substantiate those issues. So we said, okay, we just stick with this three, and we created this simple. My mind is limited, as you guys know, I'm not very smart. So stress, durability is negative here because our intuition says more durable, I give you higher score. So we said, okay, 10 minus durability is the way we are going to count this. And then the use, all three are then divided by 30 because each one has a maximum of 10. And we also tried to put some weight into different parameters here to see whether they make any difference. And then the weight will add up to 10. And we actually tried both ways and did not see any significant difference, but we did see a good correlation between our model and the aging data that we found. So here is what we did. Okay, we put those three scores: stress, durability, use, and then we try to use weight in some cases, and then we try both and see how they correlate. And the bottom line here is that we saw, as we expected, that there is a threshold that you can say that, hey, if the score is above, if you use weight, it would be 51, without weight is 59, roughly can round to 50 and 60. And above that, I would think that that device is probably going to suffer aging impacts, and I need to think differently about them as compared to the ones with lower scores. So if you want to call them CIAs, NIAs, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, you say, hey, I'll use the score, and that helps out to do things. So how we tested the model, we got 5 persons, each one with more than 10 years of experience, but they were not participants in the model formulation that we did. We said, here is a list of devices. You guys go out and give scores. And if you want to use weight, we gave them the choice of weights. And then we computed and we saw these averages, standard deviation, and our model numbers. And as you can see, they are roughly compatible, consistent. It's not perfect. And also, we will see this later, that the use was quite heavily emphasized by the people who tested, but the durability was not so considered. For example, this person put 1 for durability in terms of weight. And we'll come back to that later, why this is happening, okay? So the model is good enough to use, and how we can use the model is what I'm going to show you here. For both planning of scheduled maintenance or planned maintenance, when you have a high score or CIA situation, you need to start not only following the manufacturer recommendations, but also consider increasing the frequency of your inspections and be prepared for more repairs with age, like the CT scanner case I mentioned. Don't sit there and think this is the same, going to be the same thing in year 7 versus year 2. No, it's going to age, it's going to demand more labor, more parts, etc. You need to be prepared for that. Whereas the NIAs, you don't really need to think about adopting the manufacturer recommendation. You can use AEM, and if the score is really low, you can run to failure even, those devices. Obviously, you have to follow the accreditation requirements for whichever accreditation organization you are subject to, unless VA and military DoD hospitals don't have to. VA voluntarily followed Joint Commission, but that is a voluntary thing. They don't get a penny from Medicare, Medicaid. Okay. And for these ones, so you can really relax and repairs needed, or if the cost of a repair is too high, you just ditch that piece of equipment, replace with another one. Okay. Assuming that you can still get the parts, etc. We're going to discuss about some of the software issues later. Okay, so this is an example of application of the model. If you have different scores, I'm showing different scores with the numbers in blue here, then you may have different consequences. For example, infusion pumps, typically they are ranked very high because they fail quite often, as you probably already know, experience yourself. But if you can find a very durable infusion pump, which nowadays I honestly don't know anyone that in that category. The last time I was asked to recommend the infusion pump, I said something like that drip thing, and the chief nursing officer showed me the door and said, "Get the hell out of here." Okay, so anyway, again, well-built defibrillators can even run on AEM, but if you have heavy use, as I mentioned before, you may want to schedule more often. So the model is flexible enough for you to make adaptations according to the need here. Replacement planning is another one that we think is usable, this kind of things. We always recommended not to use the age by itself, but to use clinical impact, safety, condition, and supportability. And in particular, if you have data on the aging impact, you can use that information to flex your model, especially in condition and supportability, because some equipment do have impact of aging, then you need to do something more carefully. The ones that don't have impact of aging, you can set up a contingency fund and then not try to schedule any replacement on a yearly basis or triennial, 5 years basis, etc. You just replace whenever it's necessary. Okay, so there are possible ways to use this that can help you do that. Okay, one thing that I find interesting that some people may or may not agree is that most of you folks, the older ones, remember the so-called Fanica model, or some people used to call that risk-based criteria. Anyone remember that? That model, unfortunately, at that time was very good, very useful, helped us fend off the Joint Commission quite a bit. But in reality, the definition of risk changed with time. Risk now we consider is a combination of severity and probability. And that model is basically a severity-based model and not considering the probability. For example, I flew here from the almost West Coast to Hartford yesterday, and I was on an airplane twice. And if that thing fell down into the sky, 300, 500 people could die. And it's a very severe case. And some of you traveled by car here yesterday or today. And now, what is your risk of suffering injury, damage in these two kinds of transportation? Why? Because of the probability. The statistics show car accidents are a whole lot more common, frequent than airplane flight. How often have you seen airplane flying? Of course, we had that little fiasco of a door opening suddenly in the middle of the sky. Okay, but normally we don't have that kind of situation, and so we need to find a way to measure probability. The problem is that to measure probability of the equipment failing is not exactly simple. You have to have a lot of data again to do that. So we are suggesting that you may want to consider to use the aging score or the classification CIA versus NIA to strengthen your severity analysis in terms of the function and physical risk. If you do that, you have a classification system that I think you can use to convince your environmental care committee, safety committee, whatever it's called, and or Joint Commission to say, hey, I want to follow the OEM recommendations, these kind of situations, and may want to increase the frequency even, and whereas I follow OEM recommendations, but I don't have to change the frequency, whereas these other two, I'm going to adopt AEM, and I have a good way to justify that. Of course, I still have to do the safety and reliability evaluation after I get my own data, but at least I have a good starting point for that. Okay. Okay. Some discussions. So we tested, and it seems to be reasonably good. The stress and use are quite intuitive. Pretty much everybody agreed that those should be considered. Durability is something, as I mentioned before, a little bit surprising. And the reason we started to put this factor in there is because we are seeing more and more cases of manufacturers. I will not say their names because they have assassins waiting for me outside. Okay. They are adopting that model. I won't go to the beginning because probably you guys are not old enough to remember that, but you folks are probably familiar with something called inkjet printers. How much you paid for the inkjet printer when you bought it? Probably something like $100, $150. How much you pay for a set of cartridges? Yeah. Sometimes it's almost as expensive as the machine. And more than that, if you buy a set of cartridges that is not made by that particular manufacturer, you put that in, and the printer says, sorry, not genuine, I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to work. So it's like that movie I mentioned before, Moneyball. It's all about money, my friend. So manufacturers are starting to focus their attention on the disposables, the infusion sets, liquids, etc., and they make a lousy piece of equipment because they don't care. Okay. Just out of curiosity here, which is the company worldwide that has the highest revenue in terms of medical devices. Medical devices is not medical equipment only, okay? Medical devices includes everything that is defined by the FDA as something that does not act with pharmaceutical function. So medical device includes, for example, implants, the disposable, the catheters, okay, etc., which is the largest company in revenue worldwide. Is Philips, Siemens, GE?
I throw out Apple.
No, Apple is not a medical device company. Electronic? Somebody say J&J? Used to be J&J and just supplemented by Medtronic. Now, they make any significant piece of equipment? Yeah, they don't. Medtronic just ditched their ventilator they bought from the old Puritan Bennett thing. Okay, because the money is in the Band-Aid. The money is in the implant. The patient that walks out of the hospital after implant surgery walks out with something that has more value than your Lexus. Okay, that's where the money is. Philips, Siemens, GE, way down there. Okay, actually, the biggest manufacturer of CT scanner in the United States or worldwide, for that matter, was not GE. Which company was that? Oh, some of the older people should remember. Well, Johnson & Johnson. And Johnson & Johnson sold it to GE. So GE could become the biggest one. And why J&J sold it? Because there's no money from the equipment. The money is in the consumables, okay? So durability is becoming a big issue. It's a marketing ploy approach, and you guys need to be careful about it, okay? We do have some issues with some equipment that is not exactly disposed, but they have lower usage because they are put aside for backups, emergencies, pandemics, etc., etc. So sometimes we see very confusing, contradictory story. Apparently, as the equipment ages, they become more reliable, but that's because they are less used. Okay, so that's not exactly a fair comparison, but we don't have the utilization data. Equipment types, we still don't have the data and analyzed to say something about it. So bundling things together is not a good thing, but we still have to put up with that. And also, technology innovations are coming and coming rapidly, although there have been very few in the last few decades. But if you pay attention to the Nobel Prizes that came out in the last 5 years, you'll see that they are not related to any hardware things. They are related to a lot of biochemical DNA, etc., etc. So those things are coming, and actually there are now some new disease treatment things based on genetic engineering. Okay, but the simple model can be used and can do some good for you to do some planning, maintenance planning, replacement planning, and also help to do the risk analysis. And also will help you to analyze what's the total cost of ownership, and I'm coming to that pretty soon. So a short commercial here. We published 3 articles in the Journal of Clinical Engineering, not because we want numbers, but because otherwise it would be something like 40, 50 pages long. So we divided into impact on maintenance, lifespan, and then the model. This just came out. So hopefully you'll get a chance to read. They have a whole lot more details behind what I showed you, but basically the message is still the same. Okay, So now comes my commercial. Let's see. As I mentioned before, I don't have a gold watch to sell you. I don't have other things to sell you. Although I do have a book to sell you, but that's not exactly very profitable. So some of you have seen maybe this book here, right? And this is another book, but I'm not here to sell you the book. I'm going to sell you something different today. Most of you folks probably have some type of retirement fund like 401k, etc. What is your expected annual return of those investments? Would you invest, for example, you're investing in something like a mutual fund that is tied to the S&P 500? If you do that, you'll probably be quite happy because systematically it has given you something like 5% per year for the last 20 some years, except for a few dips during the financial crisis. Now, if I tell you that I can sell you one that gives you 20% per year, would you buy it? Guaranteed 20%. Am I lying? We always had a challenge to justify clinical engineering or HTM cost. We tried the so-called cost of service ratio, and that turned out to be bogus. Why? Because the cost of servicing something, as I mentioned with the example of TV and now with cars, for example, whoever drives, I just rented yesterday a Torgeir EV car. I never had a Torgeir EV car. There's no oil to change. Even Consumer Report, which is a reputable independent organization, says EV cars have lower cost of maintenance than any other internal combustion engine car. Obvious reason. No oil to change, no transmission, right? So the cost has nothing to do with the cost of the purchase. Those things are not associated, and our aging model shows that it's not a cost. So we tried benchmarking across different hospitals. Unfortunately, very few people participated, and the data was not properly audited, analyzed, etc. So the data was incomplete and limited, and people started complaining about it. We did find that the cost of clinical engineering HTM is in the neighborhood of 0.5 to 2% of the hospital's total operating expense, OPEX, with a median around 1.1%. But that by itself is not convincing for most C-suite decision makers. They say, well, so what? It's just expense. So I'm going to squeeze you and squeeze you until you say, cry mother, I cannot do it anymore, right? Now, we are now have data to prove that we are extending the life of the equipment by more than twice the number of years that the American Hospital Association and others suggested that we can keep those things alive. So if you take a 400-bed hospital, okay, that you spend probably $6.2 million, and the cost of the capital devices is $110 million, if you assume, these numbers I revised recently, but still it's the right ballpark. 1/3 equipment is 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, and we extend that to 10, 15, 20 years. So we can save per year $8.3 million because you don't have to replace those things that often. And you, of course, you can tell me, yeah, this is not exactly return of investment because you are not putting money into a mutual fund and get money out of it. But I can still use the same concept and say that, hey, the savings I get from capital investment minus what I spent on HTM divided by HTM, I'm getting a 33%. The revised number is a little lower, 24%, but it is a very significant return on investment. You are really bringing a significant financial benefit for the hospital. You say, I'm extending life. They say, so what? Yeah, but here is the money. Okay, this is something that you need to start thinking about using to explain why I need people, I need money to do things, because I am helping you to extend life. Besides taking care of your patients promptly and safely. Okay, so whoever promised I want money. Okay, all right, that's what I have prepared for you folks. Questions, answers, criticisms, disagreements.